duty. And when they're telling me they have to deal with things that, if you've ever seen the movie The Cave and The Descent, they're telling me of stories that literally when some of the bravest and some of the toughest, the most dangerous men in the world, literally encounter this stuff and what has to happen in order to fight these things, I'm telling you, it takes a whole level of unreality out of the equation and puts you immediately thrust into a world that has been, if you will, matrixed or kept from us. And I'm wondering how people are going to adjust. So the scenario I'm laying out is obviously a threat will have to be generated. You have to obviously have the fear factor. With the threat will have to be enough visible evidence and enough anecdotal evidence to make people starting to worry. And, for instance, more abductions, entire groups of people disappearing.
And get more and more of this information out.
Absolutely. Right? So I believe that's already started, especially with the Catholic Church has been probably on the forefront of talking about, number one, can aliens be saved? Do they need to be saved? Are they beyond the grace of God? Are they all evil? Are they good? And I mean, when you start seeing this in,
I know it was, and also, you can believe in extraterrestrials and not worry about your belief in God. I mean, those were just fascinating statements.
Right. This is a quantum shift. This is what's called a transformed thought indication, simply stating that what has been the accepted and usually taught, if you will, or closely held beliefs are now opening up. And I can tell people this. Most people don't understand the Vatican has an intelligence agency second to none. They hook in with the major intelligence agencies in the West and obviously have ties to the East also. So when Malachi Martin, for instance, Father Malachi Martin, before his death, he was talking about this stuff. And there are people, myself included, that believe he was murdered for, at that point in time, saying too much. When I've had four-star generals tell me that the number 1 and 2 things that NASA does not want people to deal with openly, it's stargates. Now, this was years ago. And also the giants or the aliens or the crossbreeds or the what are called incubatoriums, the secret underground labs. We've all heard Phil Schneider, or a lot of people have heard Phil Schneider's interview before, by the way, he was murdered, of the battles in Dulce. Dulce is the underground base in Dulce, New Mexico.
Exactly.
And I can tell you this, that I've literally talked to the people that are charged with going into these bases when some of these things get loose. And when I talk about some of these things, it's interesting that people have a hard time understanding that the Russians, one of the foremost eye surgeons in the world, the foremost, not one of the foremost, I want to correct myself, Dr. Ernest Moldashev, probably the lead investigator looking the world over for giants, was talking to about a certain vicinity that even some of these giants that are in suspended animation, that you cannot go beyond a certain barrier before literally the emanations coming out of their brains almost telepathically begin to almost tear your head apart. Now, this is coming from a Russian that was taken into the caves in the Himalayas. Now, I jumped to one of the underground bases. In this case, we'll go to Dulce, where a specific group of very brave and amazing men and women that are without equal. When I say without equal, it's one thing to deal with something you can see. It's another thing to have to deal with this stuff.
That's right.
But they talked about a group of scientists that would not obey the red line. The red line is a literal geographical distance. I think it's like 14 or 17 feet where they cannot go, even beyond where these things are caged. And some found out the hard way. And basically, it sounded like to me that these things were able to literally take these individuals apart. I think I was told that over a dozen scientists perished underground when they thought that the red line, it's painted on the floor, by the way, in one of these areas.
Jeez.
So, these are stories. People say, oh, this is all crazy stuff. What are you drinking? I don't drink. What are you smoking? Don't smoke. And the thing is that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word can be established. So what I've tried to do, George, as you know, as I track different people down around the world and talk to them, I obviously have bits of information that I keep close to the vest that A doesn't know that I necessarily know, and B doesn't know that I necessarily know.
I have long suspected that as much as you reveal on this program and your own, that sometimes you hold back for a reason.
I do, because if that's the only way that I have of being able to verify. Now, look, in talk radio, we're all subject to information, misinformation, and disinformation.
You got to weed through it.
You got to weed through it. But the only way that I can basically bring the best job that I can do is get independent verification of the same event from different sources, unknown to each other. And when the details stack up, 5 points for 5 points, I got to tell you something. There is no doubt in my mind that I've been given the truth. Now, again, people say, well, why would anybody talk to you? Well, it's simple, because my goal is to give people a realistic heads-up, a future glimpse, if you will, of what lies on the horizon. In this case, the event horizon is upon us. And as we talk later in the show, there are so many events taking place. For instance, the Hadron Collider. A lot of people have a hard time understanding the idea of a Stargate.
And it goes online next week.
Barring, as you're probably aware, there's a lawsuit against it.
Right, 2 of them, actually.
Right.
Now, one in Europe, one here.
Right, but what's fascinating to people, they should understand, just in the last 2 years, George, if you look at all the nuclear power anomalies worldwide, okay, there have been so many nuclear anomalies. Rose Havari and some of the sites that monitor all the different events literally record and put out on a map. You can go on their site and see all the anomalies. When I talk to a specific group of military individuals about that, they said, Steve, they can only keep the gates open for 10 seconds at a time. And there have been, in no kidding, there have been 50 to 60 separate events in nuclear reactors. This is unrelated to earthquakes. It's just like there were never any events. So when Hawk, who was a guest host, you and I've talked about him,
yes,
that used to take my show for me one day a week, when he was the first to acknowledge that and pick it up, it started to become really, really apparent that someone's diverting a horrific amount of power for some purpose. And they'll usually come up and say, oh, they had a leak of radioactive water, blah, blah, blah. But what people don't understand is that it takes a horrific amount of energy to power the gates. And when I approached a certain group of individuals about this, and I said, okay, why are all of these events happening? And they're saying they're opening the gates. Now, what's fascinating is that Jesus made a statement, interesting statement, that the gates of hell will not prevail against the people of faith, okay, against his church, which he told to Peter. Now, most people think of gate, you don't get beat up by a gate, okay? But a gate either holds something back or allows something through.
That's right.
And so the fact is that the stargates, now what I'm bringing that right into the Hadron Super Collider, when you remember, George, the show The Time Tunnel?
Yes.
Isn't it fascinating if you take that science fiction show, late 60s, maybe early 70s?
It's just like CERN.
Yeah, it's just like CERN. So the point is that in quantum physics, obviously, the realm of what I call black physics, and black physics are the realm of what I would say hyperdimensional physics that Richard Hoagland and others talk about, that exist beyond the standard training of, let's say, a physics teacher in college. And in the world of intelligence, or as I usually say, lack of it, the point is that you are compartmentalized. The information you're given is usually you get to build part A of the alphabet through Z, and you don't always see unless your security clearance is high enough. We're talking about clearances that are majestic, are cosmic. These are real names of clearances that are 28 levels above top secret. So what's fascinating to me is that the warnings that are going out are real. And unfortunately, the people that are now watching the hurricanes, we've got 4 on the horizon, I would encourage everyone to pay specific attention. Google Earth, the